Sorry for that delay. I needed to pull the door. A little noise in the hall. Okay. This is for the 1704-04 document, but we're going to start with something that's not on the document. First question on the document is covered right here. First, it turns out that we need to cover the entire concept of interest and compounding of interest. So there's a lot of background we need, and after that background, we'll be able to quickly answer the first question. So let's develop the background. Okay, so let's say we invest $1,000 at 8% annual interest. Well, that is the situation of the first problem. But on the first problem, I say compounded quarterly, etc. So we're just going to do it yearly. Okay, so and implicitly we're compounding this every year. So let's see what happens if we compound this every year. So how much do we have after 1 year, how much after 2, how much after 3, and do we then see a pattern that we can extend to answer how much we have after 2 years? Well, after a year, you have $1,000 plus 8% of $1,000, and that's what people did, and they got $1,080, and that's very good. But then for the next year, they got $1,060 because at least 2 out of 3, 2/3 of the class, got $1,060 because they just added another $80. And then they got another $80 and got $1,240, $1,160, $1,240. And that's an immediate sign that somebody isn't understanding what it means to invest money and how its interest is calculated, because this is the way interest is calculated. Okay, so it's important to know this practically. You know, you kind of got to know this so you get an idea how investments can grow. Very relevant skill, but also underlies our entire concept of what we mean by a growth rate and what an exponential function means and when it applies. Okay, so the mistake after calculating $1,080 is people calculated 8% of $1,000 and added it and told me that's what we had at the second year, but that's not it. Because when you calculate your interest for the second year, you started the second year with $1,080, not $1,000. So you add 8% of $1,080, and of course you add that to $1,080. Okay? And when you calculate that, I think you get $1,166.40. Now I've got a calculation here that I probably messed up just a little bit. And I did it in my head. People did it with their calculator, got 1259 something. That's fine. Do it with your calculator. Fix my limited arithmetic here. You take 1166.80 and you add 8% of 1166.80, which gives you 1166.80, and I got 93.91. Okay, and something's wrong with that because if you add this, I think you really do get 1260.31. So something's wrong with that calculus. It might have been 92.91. But do it yourself. Okay. Anyhow, you get something pretty close to 1260. Okay. Now you're not going to be able to use this to find a pattern to these numbers that allows you to figure out the value after 2 years. So we want to approach this a little differently. We want to kind of simplify this. Now, first place, 1,000 plus 0.08 times 1,000. We can factor out 1,000. Isn't that $1,000 times 1 plus 0.08? You know, because factor out 1,000, we get 1,000 times, well, just go backwards. Use the distributive law, because all the factoring is using the distributive law backwards. 1,000 times 1 is 1,000. 1,000 times 0.08 is 0.08 times 1,000. So clearly, this means the same thing this does. Also, 1 plus 0.08. Now, this involves some arithmetic that people are really shaky on. Shouldn't be. Our curriculum is terrible about this. They put a calculator in your hands and expect you to remember what you learned in 5th grade, if you learned it in 5th grade, and I think you probably did. Okay? 1 plus 0.08 is 1.08. Now that should be something that's so obvious that it doesn't even need to be stated. But it isn't obvious to people, so you really have to think about why that's true. You better go back and review addition of decimal numbers so you understand why this is 1.08. Very important to understand this because you do this with variables in a minute. Okay, so what we've done is we've multiplied anyhow. What we get here is the same thing we'd get if we multiplied 1,000 times 1.08, isn't it? Okay, now, what we get here then, well, this is the same thing as $1,080 times 1 plus 0.08, which is 1,080 times 1.08. But what's 1,080? 1,080 is $1,000 times 1.08. And that is what the 1,080 is. And that's multiplied by 1.08. And that equals $1,000 times 1.08 squared. Now, down here, our 1166.40 is just this. Well, let's use purple to underline that. I'll use purple to underline this to show you this is the same as this. And if you, and I'm going to write it down without going through every step. This 1166.40 is 1,000 times 1.08 squared. And you can take your calculator, and you probably want to. I don't mind if you take a calculator to square 1.08, although you ought to be able to square that as a binomial. The decimal places get a little confusing. So go ahead and use your calculator, multiply by 1,000, verify that you get this. Okay? Now, that's here and here, so we can factor that out. We have 1 plus 0.08, which is 1.08. Okay? And what's that equal? Well, let's see, what color am I on now? I don't know. Actually, I did that in blue. So I should have written all this in blue to be consistent, but that's 1,000 times 1.08 cubed. And now the pattern ought to be very clear. We take 1,000 multiplied by 1.08, that's what we have after 1 year. We take 1,000 and multiply it by 1.08 squared, and that's what we have after 2 years. And that's this. And then we take that and multiply it by 1.08, and we get this, which is the amount we have after 3 years. Again, check my arithmetic on that. There's something wrong here. Okay? Not far wrong, but it's a little bit wrong. So if we take the number of years and raise 1.08 to that power, does that make sense? Well, yeah, because every year we're going to multiply by 1.08 again, and again, and again, and again. So if we want the 4-year amount, we just take our 1,000 times 1.08 to the 4th, 5th-year amount, 1,000 times 1.08 to the 5th, and so forth. Now, I wrote some stuff out here just again to emphasize 1 plus 0.08 is 1.08. You have to understand this. You have to understand addition of decimals. You have to understand what these numbers mean well enough to see clearly that this is the case. And then that adding 0.08 times the principal gives you 1.08 times the principal, whatever the principal is. So every time you add 0.08, you multiply your principal by 1.08, and you multiply your old principal, whatever your principal was at the beginning of this year, you multiply by 1.08 to get at the end of the year. So I've just written out here pretty much the same thing I wrote over here, so that's not essential. And here I've just, again, pointed out Adding 8% is the same as multiplying by 1.08. I've got to keep emphasizing that. Okay. So what do we have after t years? Well, after t years, after 1 year we have 1.08, which is 1.08 to the 1. After 2 years we have 1.08 squared. After 3 years we have 1.08 cubed. Whatever the power is, that's the number of years. So if the number of years is t, the power of 1.08 is t. So we have 1.08t times $1,000, which we can write as $1,000 times 1.08 to the t.